Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
In the 24th century, a large number of planets in the Alpha and Beta quadrants belonged to the United Federation of Planets, an alliance co-founded by humans in the 22nd century and ruled from Earth. Starfleet serves the Federation for the exploration of space, but is also used for defense. Starfleet's most important official directive, the so-called Prime Directive, is an expression of the principle of non-interference, especially in less developed pre-warp civilizations. Not in the Federation are, among others, the Klingons, the Romulans, the Ferengi, the Cardassians, the Bajorans, and so on, who coexist more but often less peaceful in alliances and with trade and peace treaties. Star Trek is an US science fiction TV series from 1966. With 79 45-minute episodes in 3 seasons, all follow-up series also have a similar episode length. In the 23rd century, mankind lives united in peace and focuses on the exploration of space, among others with the spaceship Enterprise. On foreign planets, the crew is confronted with unknown phenomena, life forms and enemies, but also with issues they have already overcome on Earth, like sexism, racism, nationalism, global war, and social or economic problems. Star Trek innovations were, among others, the warp drive, which makes interstellar travel even beyond light speed possible, short-distance beaming for nearby destinations, for example, to a planet from its orbit, communication between crew members with voice communication devices, tricorders for data recording, storage and analysis, and phasers as weapons, which can be said to stun or to kill. Later in TNG there were editions of Replicator and Holodecks. The original series has neither episode nor season overarching storylines. Each episode has a standalone story that works with the problem of the week principle, a common storytelling tool back then. TOS is very much focused on Captain James T. Kirk, played by William Shatner, which compared to the other captains before and after him comes sometimes across gritty and as a womanizer, which was back then in the 60s in line with the spirit of the times and standard and entertainment. Later Commander may seem a lot more level-headed and realistic, but it is simply wrong to suggest, like in Fake Trek 2009, that Kirk would act hot-headed, impulsively, or even recklessly. Series creator Gene Roddenberry described the concept as wagon train to the stars. In the original pilot episode The Cage, the Enterprise reacts to a fake distress call from Talos 4. Captain Pike is captured by the Telosians, a highly developed telepathical species, but eventually manages to come to terms with them and returns to his ship while an illusion copy of him remains on the planet. The very good episode was rejected by the broadcasting company at the time because they felt it's too ambitious, and Roddenberry produced a new pilot. In addition, the entire crew was replaced except for Vulcan Spock, which logical behavior and lack of emotions became the hallmark of his character, now with Kirk as new captain. The cage was slightly modified and integrated in a nonsensical framework plot into a two-parter, episode 11 and 12, The Menagerie. Here, after an accident, Captain Pike ends up paralyzed in a wheelchair. And Spock breaks all regulations to bring him to Talos 4, where he could live a normal life independently from his body. On the way, Spock is put on trial and he kind of uses the old pilot footage to explain his actions. In episode 22, Space Seed, the Enterprise discovers a 20th century sleeper ship after a distress call. They find too late out that the people on the ship are eugenically created and genetically enhanced, banned from Earth after an uprising, in particular the former dictator Khan Noonien Singh, who immediately begins with his men to bring the Enterprise under his control. In the end, Kirk manages to defeat him, leaving Khan and his people on Ceti Alpha 5, a rough but habitable planet. The episode was continued in 1982 with Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. In episode 34, Mirror Mirror, Kirk, Scott, McCoy and Uhura have, due to an iron storm, a transporter accident and rematerialize in a parallel universe, in a modified Enterprise with a brutal crew that act complete opposite to their counterparts in our universe. Just like the regular crews in Kurt's Trek, STD or Kurt's Drek, Puke Heart. After TOS was cancelled due to low ratings, the series developed a cult status over the years thanks to constant reruns on TV and an extremely loyal, constantly growing fan base. This led to a reactivation, especially after science fiction had a comeback in the 70s with 2001 and Star Wars. There were also countless books, comics, computer games, fan conventions, official but also unofficial fan projects. More about those soon in Galaxy Quest. Besides the original series, short, TOS and the movies, there are 4 more TV series. Except SDE aka ENT, they are all set in the 24th century with 7 seasons each. The Next Generation, short TNG with 178 episodes. My favorite, Deep Space Nine, short DS9 with 176 episodes, and Star Trek Voyager STV with 172, all of which I find very good. Except for Star Trek Enterprise from 2001, which is just mediocre at best, but still kind of entertaining. The last real Star Trek series is also the only one set in the Star Trek past, more precisely in the 22nd century, about 100 years before Kirk and TOS. In 98 episodes, an Enterprise sets out for the first time to explore space, which already violates canon since the number of ships with this name was already mentioned before, and this was not one of them, which tries under the suspicious observation of the Vulcans make contact with other species and go where no one has gone before. Besides the Vulcans, of course, which sometimes are depicted as a kind of bad guys. In the beginning, there is also still no Federation and no Prime Directive. Enterprise, the prequel nobody asked for, was never really able to find its audience, and thanks to low ratings, it was the first after TOS that unfortunately got cancelled after the 4th season. Personally, I was never a fan of soap operas nor had Scott Bakula as captain whatsoever. Furthermore, in my opinion, the prequel format, messing out of laziness with canon and the past, is quite the opposite of the Star Trek spirit, which I interpreted as looking forward to the future. In 1973, the entertaining Star Trek The Animated Series made 22 25-minute episodes in 2 seasons, which continued the adventures of TOS partially with the original characters and actors. It has a slightly different cast and more advanced technology, such as a holodeck, which is why after Star Trek The Motion Picture, in which holodecks still not exist, she was considered by Roddenberry as not canon. Over the years, however, many facts from the series were confirmed afterwards, such as Captain Kirk's middle name, Tiberius, the second door on the bridge, Grayson as the last name of Spock's mother Amanda, the existence of several transporter rooms, and so on. According to Paramount, it is again thanks to the DVD release part of the official canon. But since Fake Trek 2009 with Kelvin timeline, prime time whatsoever and other nonsense, canon itself was put to rest. Also officially. So it really doesn't matter anymore. Excellently researched and described by the Midnight's Edge channel.
And Midnight's Edge After Dark. Don't forget that.
Damn it.
Whatever. The 3 bad reboot movies, as well as the involuntarily satire series Discovery from 2017 and Picard from 2020, are now science but fiction, aka fantasy in space scenery, with childish what-if scenarios in which natural laws, logic and canon are strictly ignored, like what if Spock were just a regular dude with emotions, with a mentally challenged, delusional human half-sister who thinks she's a Vulcan, directly pulled out of Kurtzman's script. What if the universe is mainly populated and led by constantly cursing, mean as fuck, incompetent lesbians, of course, independent women, and probably because of that, all men act like chicks. Or much like in the real world, the Federation is run by secret services, therefore giving up research and exploration of space, and just like real world, UN or NATO, promoting war and genocide and instigating conflicts rather than resolving them. Already briefly touched on in Cup vs. Disney, but more about that coming soon in Cup vs. Star Trek. In 1979, Robert Wise' Star Trek became the first motion picture. A gigantic, unknown destructive object is heading straight for Earth. In this emergency, Admiral James D. Kirk regains command over the Enterprise, which is currently upgraded in the space dock. On the way, he picks up his science officer Spock from Vulcan, who is already sensing the presence of the unknown entity that later calls itself Reacher. The movie made its very high $45 million budget. Star Wars, for comparison, costs $11 million, less than a quarter, 2 times in the US and 3 times worldwide back. And for sure did not make much of a profit. It got moderate to negative reviews, but they got with the time a bit better. Star Trek, the slow motion picture, is very good, and in my opinion it is the only one besides Part 4 which represents more the Trek spirit that really reflects the TV series, which also had sometimes little to no action and a philosophical approach. This works best on TV, but not really on the big screen. The movie has spectacular effects and delivers breathtaking visuals like 2001. The relatively thin plot about a former NASA space probe, precisely Voyager 6, which develops a consciousness and now wants to meet its creator, is told with a too slow pace for the big screen, and it is probably just enjoyable for hardcore Trekkies.
Take the children and yourself and hide out in the cellar. By now the fighting will be close at hand. Don't believe the church and state and everything they tell you. Believe in me, I'm with the high command.
The later movies are all less philosophically optimistic, often have a more military, darker tone and more action, which is why they work much better on the big screen, but some fans quite rightly make a difference between Star Trek and cinema action Trek. In 1982, Nicholas Meyer's legendary Star Trek II came with The Wrath of Khan, which is considered by many to be the real cinema start of the franchise. Khan and his people escape their exile from the TOS episode Space Seed and wants now to take revenge on Kirk for his banishment. He takes possession of the by Kirk's former girlfriend, and his new discovered son developed Genesis technology, which can create and destroy life at the same time. Khan almost succeeds in destroying the Enterprise, which is only prevented by Spock, who sacrifices his life. With a $12 million budget, the film made nearly $100 million worldwide back and is widely regarded as the best Star Trek movie ever by audiences and critics. The movie is part one of a trilogy in which the plot continues exactly where the last one left off. He was supposed to be called The Undiscovered Country. This title was later used in part 6, also directed by Nicholas Meyer. The audience gets also to see for the first time the impossible Kobayashi Maru test, which Kirk passed as the only one ever successfully by cheating. The test confronts cadets with a hopeless situation, which always ends in the death of a crew member. It is one of the movie themes, but also age, responsibility, retribution, and fear of losing control. Wrath of Khan is nearly perfect. A highly intelligent, ingenious story, perfectly cast and staged, with effects that were spectacular for that time and which are still convincing today.
There's a gun and ammunition just inside the doorway. Use it only in emergency. Better you should pray to God, the Father and the Spirit. We'll guide you and protect you from up here. Can you hear me?
In 1984, Spock actor Leonard Nimoy's Star Trek III was on the search for Spock, so of himself, probably some kind of self-finding. After Spock's burial on the newly created Genesis planet, the damaged Enterprise flies to the repair dock. Dr. McCoy begins to behave strangely, because Spock apparently transferred his mind shortly before his death, with Vulcan mind melting into Bones, who now tries to illegally reach the quarantined Genesis planet. Kirk can only help both of them with a Vulcan re-drill. And thanks to the Genesis effect, Spock is reborn and fast growing. The crew ignores all orders of Starfleet Command and decides to steal the Enterprise, which is about to be decommissioned. At the same time, a Klingon bird of prey commander also decides to ignore orders and to steal the Genesis technology and use it as a weapon. However, the Genesis effect is unstable and the planet is destroying itself. Kirk's son, quite the father, cheated for faster results. In the final, another hopeless situation, he satisfies his life and Kirk satisfies the Enterprise to trick the Klingons. They fly with a bird of prey to Vulcan, where Spock's spirit is transferred to the Genesis body. On a $16 million budget, the movie made $87 million worldwide back and received mostly positive reviews, but of course less than its brilliant predecessor, because he felt like a step down. Part 3 is also very well directed, with an entertaining but not really original and pretty far-fetched story. whose tone constantly fluctuates between serious drama and comedy. Among other things, he tries to repeat some of the themes from his predecessor with his son, who also has to die at the end, which from my point of view is a too nonsensical overkill and comes off a bit too dark and gritty for Star Trek.
Allegiance to the flag, whatever flag they offer. Never hint at what you really feel. Teach the children quietly, for someday sons and daughters will rise up and fight while we stood still.
In 1986, the Enterprise crew flies in Leonard Nimoy's Star Trek IV in the German title allegedly Back to the Present, in the original they voyage home, and in the movie itself to the past of 1986. After the events of the last movie, they take their captured Klingon bird of prey and return to Earth to face their trial for their actions. Earth is apparently under attack by an enormous cylindrical probe. which signal disables the global power grid and generates planetary storms. They find out that the probe is trying to make contact with humpback whales. Admiral Kirk and his crew travel back in time to find some of the in the 23rd century extinct whales. The comedy made its $21 million budget worldwide more than 6 times back and received rightly mostly positive reviews. The movie doesn't take itself too seriously and plays mostly on Earth. It is like a long, super entertaining protect the environment and save the whales commercial, which is why it is especially well received by people who don't really care about Star Trek or science fiction in general. The Voyage Home was my first Star Trek movie ever. It's my personal favorite of the franchise and also one of the best movies I know. He's also the main reason why I went back to watch part 1 to 3 in the first time. I knew the TV series and liked it very much as kid, but I wasn't a Star Trek fan yet because back then the really cool kids like me were of course more into Star Wars. Also until the mid-80s, and thanks to an extremely small budget, something like zero, and a super conservative father, God bless his soul, I had almost no chance to watch them anyway. That changed when I did some parents' undetected gardening work after school and was able to afford my own TV and VCR, which I was hiding in my room, becoming the secret cinema for my little brother and me. In 1989, the Enterprise flies in Kirk actor William Shatner's legendary space turd and almost franchise killer Star Trek V in the German title To the Edge of the Universe, wherever that's supposed to be with something infinite, in the original title To the Final Frontier because second line in the introduction of TOS, and in the movie itself none of these things but simply to the center of the galaxy. The Enterprise flies to a planet to free ambassador hostages. Kidnapped by Sporks pulled out of the ass, I mean of course well established and total believable half-brother Cyborg, who has always been there and just forgot to be mentioned or hinted on in the last 4 movies, 79 episodes and the animated series. Just like his other 15 illegitimate and or adopted brothers, sisters, nephews, uncles and so on. Since everybody knows that especially Vulcans, who only couple every 7 years and even consider half-human Spock is not Vulcan enough, are constantly creating somewhere offspring or adopting alien kids into their families. Cyborg has magic powers, making everyone except Kirk, because he's the author of this nonsense, his unconditional follower by confronting people with primal fears, or not. It really depends what the story actually needs. He takes over the Enterprise to fly to the center of the galaxy, where he hopes to find God, since he apparently lives there or is working there or whatever. The serious manned Shatner trip only doubled its $33 million budget worldwide. The boring story barely entertains even on TV standards, and the effects look cheap and unfinished and were already outdated back then. He was quite rightly laughed at by many critics and the audience. In 1991, Nicholas Meyer's Star Trek VI entered the undiscovered country, an allusion to Shakespeare's Hamlet, but unlike in the play, it's not death but the future that is meant here. He forms the official conclusion of the cinematic adventures of the TOS crew, who can be seen here for the very last time together. After the explosion of the main energy source of the Klingon homeworld, a reference to the nuclear Chernobyl disaster in April 1986, the Enterprise is assigned to offer Chancellor Gorkon a safe passage to the peace negotiations on Earth. But already the first meeting of the former enemies results in an insidious murder of the Chancellor, resulting in Kirk and McCoy, thanks to doctored evidence, ending up after a show trial in a Klingon prison camp. The worthy farewell to the old Enterprise has turned out so entertaining that it's easy to overlook the by-the-numbers simple story, and he is still Shakespeare compared to the last one. He could more than triple his $27 million budget worldwide back and got, quite rightly, mostly positive feedback.